dollars on. The man from Kellerman Foods had been buying from the same 12 farms for 19 years. He drove a white truck with a refrigerated bed and a clipboard that never left his front seat, and he did not make appointments because he did not need to. Everybody knew when Gideon Marsh was coming. The dust from his truck on County Road 7 was announcement enough. He pulled into the Aldrich place on a Tuesday in late October 1977, expecting to see what he always saw. The same tired operation, the same half-rotted fence posts along the east pasture, the same bees going nowhere in particular. What he did not expect was the woman standing at the edge of the field in rubber boots, with a smoker in one hand and a clipboard of her own tucked under her arm. What do you mean? She did not look up when he parked. She finished what she was writing first. That was the first thing Marsh noticed about Lavinia Aldrich. She finished what she was doing first. Allen, he would not forget that. $300 on. Lavinia Aldrich had taken the property the previous spring at 39 years old in a settlement that nobody in Harlan County, Kentucky thought was fair to her. The farm was 212 acres of worn-out bottomland, a woodlot that had not been managed in a decade, 8 Langstroth hives that her ex-husband's uncle had installed in 1969 and then more or less abandoned. The house needed a new roof. The well pump stuttered every third day. $100 on. The truck in the barn had not turned over since Gerald Aldrich drove it into the side of the grain elevator outside of Berea and walked away from both the truck and the marriage in the same month. On. What Lavinia received in the settlement, the county clerk's office privately agreed, amounted to the part of the estate nobody else wanted. Her sister Phyllis drove down from Lexington the weekend after the papers were signed and stood in the side yard looking at the hives. There were 8 of them. White boxes with peeling paint, listing slightly in the soft ground near the tree line. Phyllis said, "You cannot keep bees." $40 on. Lavinia was already writing something in that clipboard. "Already here," she said. "Somebody has to." Phyllis went back to Lexington on Sunday. Lavinia stayed. People of Baylor's Creek, the nearest town, 4,000 souls, a grain elevator, 2 hardware stores, a diner called the Millstone that had not changed its menu since 1961, had complicated feelings about Lavinia Aldrich. She was not from there originally. $30 on. She had come with Gerald 11 years before from eastern Tennessee, and Gerald had been the one people knew. Gerald with his easy laugh and his habit of buying rounds at the VFW hall on Friday nights. Lavinia had been quiet. Lavinia had kept to herself. She had worked at the county extension office for 3 years, before Gerald's drinking made it easier to stay home than to explain. On. After Gerald left, the general expectation in Baylor's Creek was that Lavinia would sell the farm to one of the Goebel brothers, who had been buying up bottomland all through that part of the county, on and go back to Tennessee or go to Lexington or go somewhere that a woman in her situation went. The Goebel brothers sent their youngest, a man named Travis, with a friendly handshake and a calculator he kept in his shirt pocket, to have what he called a preliminary conversation. Lavinia offered him iced tea and munt tea and listened to everything he said and then told him she was not selling. Corpus Goebel drove back to his brother's and reported that the Aldrich woman was either very stubborn or very confused, possibly both. She was, in fact, was paying attention. Lavinia had spent her 3 years at the extension office reading everything they had on apiculture, not because it was her job, but because the resource library was there, and the bees on the Aldrich property were failing. And she had grown up in a hollow in Claiborne County, where her grandmother kept 12 hives and called the bees the only livestock that paid rent without eating your hay. She had read the journals, $14 on. She had sent away for a manual from the University of Tennessee agricultural program. She had written letters, actual paper letters, to two commercial beekeepers in Georgia whose names she found in the back of a periodical, and both of them had written back. Gerald had thought this was funny. He called it her little hobby. He said it in the tone men use when they want a woman to feel smaller than the word hobby already makes her feel. She kept the letters anyway. In the spring of 1977, 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized, Lavinia drove 40 miles to a farm supply auction outside of Richmond and bought 14 additional hive bodies, 2 bee suits, one for herself and one she did not yet have a reason for, and 200 pounds of sugar for feeding colonies through their establishment. $100 on. The auctioneer, a retired dairy farmer named Pete Holbrook, who had been running that sale for 22 years, watched her load the equipment into the back of her borrowed truck and could not quite account for it. "To you keeping bees," he said, and his voice had that particular quality that questions get when they are not really questions. "I'm expanding an existing operation," Lavinia said. $40. Pete Holbrook did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, which was the correct response. On. She drove home in the rain with the hive bodies sliding against each other in the truck bed, and the radio playing something she didn't recognize, and she was not happy exactly. But she was steady, and steady was what she needed to be. The season was hard. 3 of the original 8 hives were too far gone. The colonies had failed over winter, probably the previous winter, and what remained was wax moth damage and empty frames. 300. Lavinia removed them herself, burning the worst of the comb in the field, and reset 4 new colonies from splits she purchased from a beekeeper 2 counties over, a retired school teacher named Harriet, who had been keeping bees for 30 years, and who looked at Lavinia for a long moment before agreeing to sell. "Most people who come to me have been thinking about bees for about a week," Harriet said. "You know what you're doing." "I already know what I've read," Lavinia said. "I need to know what the bees do." Harriet laughed. It was a real laugh, not the kind people gave you when they were being polite. She sold Lavinia the splits at cost and threw in a queen cage with a marked queen, a yellow dot on the thorax that she had been raising herself. "He's a good one," Harriet said. "Don't let her go cheap." The second hive she placed nearest the woodlot swarmed in June, which was both a setback and a sign. A healthy colony swarms when it outgrows its space, and this one had grown fast. Lavinia caught the swarm herself in a cardboard box she had kept in the barn for exactly this possibility, and installed them in one of the new hive bodies before noon. Her hands shook the whole time, stung 4 times through a gap in her glove. She didn't stop. By August of that first year, she had 14 working colonies. Her notebook, a green composition book she had bought at the Rexall in Baylor's Creek, had entries for every hive, every inspection, every queen sighting or absence, every pound of honey pulled. The entries were not poetic, they were precise. Temperature, brood pattern, temper of the colony, weight estimate by lifting the back of the hive. She had rigged a simple hanging scale from a crossbeam in the barn and learned to weigh each box before and after pulling supers, so she had actual numbers rather than guesses. When the first local honey buyer came to the farm in September, a man named Stewart, who supplied 4 grocery stores in the region and drove a van that smelled permanently of wax. He looked at her operation for a long time without saying much. Stewart had been buying local honey for 11 years. He had bought from husband and wife operations, from retired couples, from one memorable character outside of Harrodsburg who kept bees in coffee cans and claimed they produced better honey for it. He had not bought from a woman running a farm alone. $14 on. He tasted the honey off a plastic spoon she offered him, standing in her barn while the bees worked in the field behind them, and he set the spoon down on the edge of a shelf. "Varietal," he said. "Partly tulip poplar from the woodlot," Lavinia said. "Some clover from the east pasture. I've got records on the bloom sequence if you need them." Paused. "You have records on the bloom sequence?" "Darlin', I've been tracking it since April." Dorothy Stewart looked at his spoon. He looked at her rows of filled jars, the labels handwritten with the harvest date and hive number. He looked at the composition books lined up on the shelf above the work table. She was on her third by then. "Take what you have," he said. "If the quality holds, we can talk contract." "He's on." He drove away with 47 pounds of honey, and a small nod she chose to interpret as respect. The quality held. In 1979, Lavinia was running 22 colonies. She had added a second bee suit, her daughters as it turned out. Her daughter Nora was 17 and had initially been horrified by the bees the way teenagers are horrified by anything their parents are earnest about. $100 on. She had been living with Lavinia since the separation and had spent the better part of the first summer indoors whenever Lavinia was working the hives. The change happened on a Saturday morning in July when a swarm landed in the elm tree at the edge of the yard, a big one, thousands of bees hanging in a shape like a dark teardrop from a low branch. Nora came out onto the porch to look, and Lavinia was already in her suit with the box. And Nora watched her mother move through those bees with a steadiness that was different from the steadiness she showed at other things. This one had no performance in it, no self-consciousness, just a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was at peace doing it. "Can I help?" Nora said. Lavinia looked at her. "There's a suit in the barn." Nora put it on. It was too big through the shoulders. She looked ridiculous, and she didn't care. She stung twice that day. She helped her mother install the swarm anyway. She was back the next weekend, and the one after that. What Nora understood by watching her mother, and it was the kind of understanding that doesn't arrive in a single moment, but accumulates like honey in a frame, pretty slow and certain, was that Lavinia was not keeping bees because she had always wanted to. She was keeping bees because she had looked at everything she had left after Gerald and decided that this was the thing she could make into something. The farm was marginal. The soil was worn. The woodlot needed 20 years of management before it would yield anything worth cutting. But the bees didn't care about any of that. The bees would work whatever was blooming, and Lavinia could manage what they worked in the margin, on honey, she had calculated in her green composition books with a precision that would have startled the people of Baylor's Creek if they had seen it. $1 was better than anything else that ground could realistically produce. She was not a woman following a passion. She was a woman following a ledger, and the ledger was starting to look very different from what people assumed. In the spring of 1980, Lavinia drove to the county co-op to pick up an order of wood and foundation for 6 new hive bodies. The co-op was a particular kind of place, the kind where men congregated near the loading dock on weekday mornings with coffee from the gas station across the road and discussed, at length, the troubles of the agricultural world. It was not unfriendly territory, exactly. It was simply territory that had been so thoroughly occupied by one kind of person for so long that the arrival of a different kind of person produced a specific quality of silence. Pulled up to the loading dock in her truck, a 1971 Ford she had repaired herself over 2 winters, with a rebuilt carburetor and a side mirror held on with a hose clamp, and went inside to settle the invoice. When she came back out, 3 of the men from the dock were standing near her truck, not doing anything exactly, just standing in the way that is still a kind of doing. One of them, a larger man everyone called Dutch, who had farmed the Meeker Road property for 30 years, looked at the hive materials in her truck bed and said to no one and everyone, "Woman's going to make a fortune on bee stings." $40. The other two laughed. It was the comfortable laugh of men who believe they are observing something rather than participating in it. For me, Lavinia loaded the last of her order into the truck. She did not look at Dutch. She did not respond. She signed the loading receipt, put the carbon copy in the glove box, and drove away. $40 on. She had learned that some things did not require a response. She had learned that the best answer to that kind of laughter was an account book that didn't need explaining. $40 on. By 1981, she had a contract with Stewart's distribution company. By 1982, she was supplying a specialty food store in Lexington that sold her honey at a premium under her label. Old Aldrich Bottoms honey, named for the bottomland the county had given her, and the Goebel brothers had not wanted. By 1983, a food writer for a regional magazine drove down from Louisville specifically to profile the operation. A woman in her 30s, who arrived in clean boots and left 4 hours later with mud on her shoes and 6 pages of notes. The article ran in the spring issue. The headline was something Lavinia did not choose and would not have chosen. But the photograph was hers. She had asked the writer's photographer to take it from inside the barn. Looking out, you could see the hives in the background field and the woodlot beyond them, and the sky going wide above everything. The photograph showed what she had built. The headline just showed what somebody else thought was interesting about her. About me. She did not complain. The orders increased by 40% the following month. $40 Gideon Marsh, the man from Kellerman Foods who had been buying from them the same 12 farms for 19 years, read the article on his kitchen table in March of 1984. He put it down and picked it up again. $40 on. He was not a man who changed his supplier list easily. He had learned, through a particular incident in 1920 involving a small orchard operation he had taken a chance on and immediately regretted, $40 on, that producers who could not sustain quality were more trouble than their honey was worth. He needed consistency. He needed volume. He needed someone who could tell him, in September, what they would have available in the following June and be correct. On, he drove out to the Aldrich place on a Tuesday in late October without calling ahead, because he never called ahead, and he found Lavinia standing at the edge of the field with a smoker and a clipboard and not particularly interested in looking up. He introduced himself at the hives. She shook his hand without taking her glove off, which meant he shook a rubber glove, which was not how these things usually went. $1,400, she showed him the operation the way she showed everyone, efficiently, without theater. She walked him through the hive yard, gave him the colony count, explained the winter preparation schedule. She showed him the extraction room she had built in the far bay of the barn, with a second-hand extractor she had refurbished, and a bottling setup she had designed herself. She showed him the ledgers. Marsh had been in this business long enough to know that most producers kept records the way people kept diaries, fitfully, selectively, more hopeful than honest. Lavinia's records were not like that. They were the records of someone who believed the numbers more than she believed her own impressions, which was, in his experience, extremely rare. He asked about capacity. She gave him a number, pounds per season, current and projected, and explained the reasoning behind the projection, which included the maturation of the woodlot's tulip poplar stand, which she had been selectively clearing to increase bloom density, and a clover reseeding program she had begun on the east pasture in 1980. Marsh wrote the number down. He asked about pricing. Lavinia gave him a price per pound that was higher than what Stewart was paying. She said this the way she said everything. without apology, without cushioning, without the upward inflection that turns a statement into a request for permission. Bush looked at his notebook. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at the extraction room. "I need a second visit," he said. "I want to see a harvest." "He pulled the last supers in September," Lavinia said. "You're welcome to come." He came in September. He watched the extraction from start to finish. He brought a small jar home and left it on his kitchen windowsill and tasted it every few days for 3 weeks to see if his opinion changed. It didn't. He called Lavinia in October of 1984 and offered her a contract. The terms were close to what she had named. He had negotiated enough to feel he had done his job. She had not moved enough to feel she had given anything away. After she hung up the phone, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. Nora was in Lexington by then, in her second year at the university, studying agricultural economics, because Lavinia had sat with her at that same table 4 years ago and said, quietly, that there was a way to do what Lavinia did, but with the degree that Lavinia didn't have, and Nora had listened. The kitchen was quiet. The woodlot was dark beyond the window. Lavinia opened the green composition book. She was on her 9th by then, and made a note. Contract signed. Kellerman Foods. First delivery spring. 1,000. Below that, she wrote something she had not written before in any of the books. The bees didn't know any of this was supposed to be impossible. 14. She closed the book. She did not celebrate in any way that anyone watching would have recognized as celebration. She washed the 2 cups she had used that day, set them on the rack, and turned off the light over the sink. In Baylor's Creek, the following spring, Dutch heard about the Kellerman contract from a man at the co-op loading dock. He heard the number, not the exact number, but close enough, and he was quiet for longer than he usually was. Someone made a remark. Dutch didn't laugh. Stewart, who had bought her honey for 7 years and understood before anyone else what she had built, sent a handwritten note when the magazine article ran. He had kept it brief. "You always knew what you had out there," he wrote. "I wasn't sure at first. I should have been." $100 on. She kept the note in the back of the first composition book, behind the entries from that first August, the ones where every column was a question, and the numbers were still small enough to be frightening. She had looked at those early pages sometimes in the years when the operation was still uncertain, when a bad winter or a sick queen or a crop failure in the surrounding fields could have changed the whole calculation. She looked at them not for calculation. She looked at them not comfort exactly, but for the same reason she weighed the hive boxes before and after every pull, to know where she had started, so she could understand what the distance actually meant. There is a particular kind of knowledge that only comes from staying. From not selling to the Goebel brothers when they sent Travis with his handshake and his calculator, from loading 400 pounds of hive equipment in the rain when no one was watching, from walking into the co-op and not answering Dutch, not because she was above it, but because she understood that her answer was already being written in the ledger, 1 season at a time, and it would be legible to anyone who was paying attention. The woodlot was different by 1985. The tulip poplars she had cleared around had come into full bloom that spring, more than in any prior year, and the hives near the tree line produced 60% more honey than the year before, Bahoud. She had known they would. She had marked the trees, tracked the canopy, calculated the light. She had been watching that woodlot for 8 years. The bees had been watching it longer. What Lavinia understood, and what the people of Baylor's Creek understood slowly and unevenly over the years that followed, was that the land had not been ruined. The land had been waiting for someone who knew how to ask it the right questions. And the right questions were not the ones people asked out loud, at loading docks over bad coffee, Valern, in the comfortable shorthand of people who have decided what something is worth before they've looked at it. The right questions were the ones she wrote in green composition books, in the barn, in the early mornings before anyone else was awake. When it was just her and the hives going quiet in the cool air, and the woodlot dark at the field's edge and the whole farm waiting to tell her something. If she was patient enough to listen. She was always patient enough to listen. Freeze on. That was the thing about Lavinia Aldrich, that nobody understood until they did. And then it seemed like something they should have seen from the beginning, as plain as the hives in the field, as plain as the ledger she kept, as plain as the woman who stood at the edge of the property in rubber boots, with a smoker in one hand, and didn't look up until she had finished writing down what she had come to say. There's a moment in Lavinia's story that I keep coming back to. Not the contract, not the magazine article, not even the look on Stuart's face when he set down that plastic spoon. It's the moment she drove home in the rain with hive bodies sliding around in the truck bed, the radio playing something she didn't recognize. And she was not happy, she was just steady. Think about that word a lot, steady. It doesn't sound like much. It doesn't make for a great headline. But I've come to believe it's the thing that separates the people who build something real from the people who only ever think about building it. What Lavinia did wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was a chain of causes and effects that she understood better than anyone around her, because she was the only one paying close enough attention to see it. She read the journals when nobody asked her to. She wrote letters to strangers in Georgia and waited for them to write back. $40 on, she tracked bloom sequences in a green composition book when her husband thought it was a hobby and the men at the co-op thought it was a joke. Every entry she made, every hive she weighed, every swarm she caught, those weren't separate acts of stubbornness. They were a single long argument she was having with the world, conducted entirely in evidence. What I mean when I say she was doing something ethical in the deepest sense of the word. Not ethical like following rules. Ethical like being honest. With the numbers, with the land, with herself. $14. She didn't pretend the operation was more than it was. She didn't overstate her projections to impress Marsh or understate her price to win his favor. Truth. She told the truth about what she had and what she expected, and she stood behind it. In a world where so many people are busy managing impressions, that kind of plain honesty is rarer than it looks. Bean, and then there's Nora. The moment Nora put on that oversized bee suit and got stung twice and came back the next weekend. I think that happened because of what Lavinia didn't do as much as what she did. She didn't perform her work for her daughter. She didn't try to make it look exciting or glamorous or more than it was. She just did it, with her whole attention, and Nora saw something in that steadiness that she wanted to be near. Children learn from what we actually are, not what we tell them we are. Lavinia didn't have to teach Nora anything about persistence. She just had to let her watch. I think that's the part of the story that doesn't get enough credit. The intelligence it takes to build something like what Lavinia built isn't the kind you get from being naturally gifted or especially bold. It's the slower kind. The kind that comes from being willing to not know something yet, to go find out, to change your approach when the evidence tells you to. She reseeded the east pasture because the numbers said clover would increase yield. She cleared around the tulip poplars because she understood how light affected bloom density. She was not guessing. She was reasoning one season at a time, and she trusted the reasoning even when the people around her didn't trust her. The whole of it, really. Character, to be honest. Intelligence to figure out what's actually true, and the endurance to keep going through years when nobody is watching and the outcome is still uncertain. Lavinia had all three, not in dramatic quantities, in the quiet, daily, barely visible quantities that actually change things. The land was not ruined. The land was waiting for someone who knew how to ask it the right questions. I think that's true of more than land.